In a quiet little town on a snowy December night, a lonely man stepped into a glowing church just to escape his past. He never expected what would happen next. A little girl in a red dress left the choir, ran across the room, and wrapped her arms around him as if she had known him all her life. With eyes full of hope, she whispered words that froze his heart and melted it at the same time. "Please be my daddy." In that moment, everything changed. This was not just a story about Christmas. It was about grief, love, second chances, and the kind of family we sometimes find when life seems to have taken everything away. If you believe in stories that heal the soul and remind us of the beauty of love, stay with us. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories for more unforgettable tales. The night had fallen heavy over Willow Creek, covering the narrow streets and rooftops with a quiet blanket of snow. Most houses glowed with the soft gold of Christmas lights, and laughter spilled from behind frosted windows. But inside a sleek black SUV parked at the edge of town, there was only silence. Graham Whitaker sat behind the wheel, his hands locked on the leather steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. The hum of the engine filled the air, but it did nothing to warm the cold inside him. He hadn't meant to stop in this town. He hadn't meant to stop anywhere, really. Ever since the accident, he had been running. From Boston to Maine, from one highway to the next, mile after mile, chasing the impossible hope that grief might lose its grip if he kept moving fast enough. But memories travel quickly, and they always caught up. Tonight it was the echo of a Christmas hymn on the radio that brought it all rushing back. He switched stations, but it didn't matter. The voice of Lee, his late wife, and the laughter of Lily, his daughter, still haunted the quiet. Turning without thinking, Graham found himself in the historic district, where cobblestones crunched under his tires and shop windows twinkled with garlands. At the top of the hill stood a church, its stained glass windows glowing against the night like embers refusing to die out. Something pulled at him. Not faith, he had lost that long ago. Not nostalgia, he had no ties here. It was something quieter, something he could not name. He parked across the street and stepped into the cold. The air smelled of pine and chimney smoke. Snow landed on his gray hair and wool coat, but he didn't brush it off. He walked toward the heavy wooden doors, pausing as voices reached him. Not the polished sound of professionals, but the raw, imperfect harmony of children. It caught him off guard. His chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. Inside, the warmth and light struck him first. Strings of yellow bulbs hung across the beams, casting a gentle glow over folding chairs and scattered hymnals. A group of children stood near the altar, their voices rising and falling as they sang with more heart than precision. They giggled when they forgot words, and one boy clapped off beat, but none of that mattered. At the front stood a woman guiding them, her voice weaving through theirs like a ribbon. She was young, with golden hair tied back loosely, her worn boots clicking softly on the floor. She didn't demand their attention. She invited it, and they gave it willingly. Graham leaned against the last pew, unsure why he had come inside. Perhaps it was the warmth. Perhaps the ache of hearing laughter that did not belong to ghosts. For a moment he allowed himself to stand still, to simply exist in a place untouched by his grief. But then the piano began, and the first notes of "O Holy Night" cut into him like barbed wire. He turned to leave, desperate to escape before the song could finish breaking him. That was when he saw her. At the center of the choir stood a little girl in a red velvet dress that was clearly too big, the hem brushing against her sparkly snow boots. Her curls bounced as she sang, her eyes shut tight, her face lifted as if she were singing to the heavens themselves. Something about her struck him, the innocence, the unguarded joy. And then she opened her eyes. The music went on, but she stopped singing. Her gaze locked on Graham. For a moment she didn't move, and then she did. First a step, then another, and then she was running. He barely had time to react before she reached him, throwing her arms around his waist with the certainty of someone who had known him forever. His body froze, his breath caught. He had forgotten what it felt like to be touched with such simple trust. Slowly he looked down at her. Her wide eyes searched his, too knowing for her age, yet filled with hope. and then she whispered the words that shattered everything he thought he had locked away. "Please be my daddy. I dreamed about you last night." The sanctuary fell silent. Even the piano keys seemed to hang in the air, unfinished. Graham stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. Something deep inside him, something that had been rusted shut for years, creaked open. Not all the way, not yet, but enough for him to feel the ground shift beneath his feet. Ellie, the woman at the front, rushed forward, cheeks flushed with equal parts worry and embarrassment. She gently tugged the child back, murmuring apologies. "I'm so sorry. She dreams a lot, she makes up stories." But the girl, Ellie, shook her head and looked back at Graham. "Mommy, I saw him in the snow. He smiled at me. He's real." Graham's throat tightened. The mother's voice softened as she tried to explain, but he barely heard her. His pulse thundered. He couldn't explain why, but the little girl's words clung to him like a thread pulling at the seams of his grief. He should have walked out. He should have left before the weight of it crushed him. And yet he stayed. When the rehearsal ended, Graham remained in the back pew, hands locked, eyes fixed on the spot where Ellie had stood. Outside, the snow fell steadily, muffling the world in white. Inside, something had cracked open in him, something he thought had died with Lee and Lily. As he stepped out of the church into the cold night air, he barely noticed the sting of the wind. All he could feel was the echo of a little girl's arms around him and the word "Daddy" still ringing in his ears. Not as a question, not as a wish, but as a fact, as though her dream had been waiting for him all along. And for the first time in years, Graham wondered if he had stopped in Willow Creek for a reason. The next morning, Willow Creek stirred to life beneath a sky painted pale blue and a ground still blanketed in snow. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the bakery windows along Main Street. Graham sat in his rental SUV outside the church, staring at the folded red scarf lying on the passenger seat. He had not remembered picking it up the night before. But there it was, as if the child had left a piece of herself with him. For a long moment he considered driving away. It would be easy. Start the engine, head south, leave this small town behind. He had done it dozens of times in other places, but something about that scarf held him still. It smelled faintly of cinnamon, snow, and something maternal. He picked it up, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then, almost against his own will, he found himself climbing the church steps again. Inside, the sanctuary was quieter than the night before. The magic of twinkling lights and children's laughter had faded into dust motes floating in beams of sunlight. But down the hallway, muffled voices reached him, children chattering, crayons scraping across paper, the off-key notes of a piano struggling to stay in tune. He followed the sound until he reached a low-ceilinged room where kids sat at tables littered with juice boxes and glitter glue. Claire stood at the front, balancing sheet music in one arm while she tried to restore some order to the chaos. Her hair was tied back, though a few strands had slipped loose, brushing against her flushed cheeks. There was exhaustion in her movements, but also a determination that felt unshakable. She turned when Graham cleared his throat. "You came back." Her voice carried equal parts surprise and caution. He nodded, pulling the red scarf from his pocket. "I believe this belongs to someone." Before Claire could respond, a small voice cut through the din. "Mr. Graham!" Ellie bounded across the room, crayons still in hand, her face alight with joy. She stopped just short of hugging him again, as though she remembered the scolding from the night before. Still, her eyes sparkled. Graham knelt and held out the scarf. "I think you dropped this." Ellie clutched it to her chest, grinning. "I knew you'd come back." Claire approached more slowly, weariness lingering in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for returning it, and for not disappearing." He shrugged lightly, didn't have anywhere else to be. Her brow arched as though she didn't believe him, but before she could reply, Ellie tugged on his sleeve. "Want to see my drawing?" She led him to a small folding table where coloring books and scraps of paper were scattered. With pride, she held up a picture, 3 stick figures beneath a yellow sun. One wore a red dress, another had golden hair with a music note on her shirt, and the tallest figure stood between them with broad shoulders and a smile. Above it, in uneven letters, were the words "My family." "That's you," Ellie explained, pointing at the tall figure. "I didn't draw your face yet. I didn't know if you'd stay." Graham's throat tightened. He glanced at Claire, who stood behind her daughter, her expression caught between warmth and unease. For a long moment he didn't know what to say. Finally he managed, "Maybe next time you can." The day slipped into rhythm. Children sang and argued over crayons. Claire orchestrated the chaos with patience, though Graham could see the strain beneath her calm. He found himself helping in small ways, stacking chairs, fixing a loose hinge on the piano bench, retrieving dropped crayons. He hadn't planned to stay, but every time he thought of leaving, Ellie's drawing flashed in his mind. Later, Claire offered him coffee in the church kitchen. The space was cramped, the counters cluttered, but her presence filled it. She studied him quietly over the rim of her mug before asking, "So, what brings you to Willow Creek?" "Just driving," he replied, eyes on the steam rising from his cup. "Got tired of cities." She tilted her head. "You always dress that well when you're tired of cities." He chuckled softly, brushing at his coat. "Old habits." Their conversation drifted: the weather, the bakery down the street, the children's excitement for the concert. Nothing deep, but the silences between words weren't heavy. They held something tentative, like a bridge being built plank by plank. That afternoon, Ellie tugged at his sleeve again. "Do you play the piano?" He hesitated, then admitted, "I used to, for my daughter." His voice caught slightly, but he didn't explain further. Ellie's eyes widened. "Will you play with me?" He wanted to refuse, to guard the pieces of himself still too fragile to touch. But her expectant face left him no choice. They sat together on the bench, her feet dangling above the floor. She pressed random keys with a giggle, and he followed with a simple melody, something he hadn't played in years. Their laughter mingled with the notes, and for a fleeting moment, Graham felt something break free inside him, not pain this time, but a memory of joy. Claire watched from across the room, her hands pressed together, her eyes glistening. For the first time in years, Graham allowed himself to meet someone's gaze without turning away. Days passed like falling snow, each one layering gently over the last. Graham became part of the choir's rhythm without fanfare. He carried chairs, tuned sticky piano keys, and even scribbled jokes on notes for the children. The kids adored him, waving when they saw him walk in. Ellie treated him as though he had always belonged there. Sometimes she slipped her small hand into his without asking, and he would freeze, afraid to move in case the moment shattered. One morning, Claire handed him a small paper bag. Inside were 2 cranberry muffins, still warm. "From the kids," she said with a teasing smile. "Apparently you're now an honorary music elf." "Is that a promotion or a demotion?" he asked. "Depends on how well you sing." The banter felt easy, natural, like a language he had forgotten he could speak. And though neither of them said it out loud, both knew something was shifting. The man who had walked into their church broken and silent was slowly becoming part of their story. Yet beneath the laughter, shadows lingered. Graham still carried the weight of a past he hadn't shared. And Claire, though she welcomed his presence, couldn't silence the worry etched into her features whenever Ellie clung to him too tightly. Because love, especially the kind that arrives when you least expect it, can feel like both a gift and a risk. Snow continued to fall over Willow Creek, soft and steady, as though the entire town had been wrapped in silence. Inside the church, however, the quiet was broken by children's voices, the clatter of folding chairs, and the scratch of pencils on sheet music. By now no one questioned Graham's presence. He moved easily among them, fixing loose light bulbs, adjusting music stands, and tightening piano screws. It was as though he had always been there, a steady hand holding something together. But the peace did not last. One afternoon, while the children rehearsed, the church treasurer, Mr. Gentry, shuffled in with a clipboard. He pulled Claire aside. whispering about a donation that had saved the Christmas concert. She assumed it was a local donor. When he handed her the paperwork, her heart dropped. The funds had come from the Lilly Foundation, backed by none other than Graham Whitaker. Claire's eyes froze on the page. She finished rehearsal in a daze, her body going through the motions while her mind spun. Later, she found Graham alone, cleaning dust from the piano keys. "You're Graham Whitaker," she said, her voice clipped. "North Point Resorts, the millionaire." He looked up, his hands stilling. "I wondered when you'd find out." "You let me believe you were just some stranger passing through," she accused. "I never lied." "No," she snapped, "but you never told the truth either." The air between them grew taut. Graham rose slowly, his expression stripped of its usual composure. "Would it have changed anything if I had?" "Yes," Claire said, her voice breaking, "because I would have known whether you were here out of kindness or out of guilt." The words landed like a blow. Graham's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "I didn't come here to fix anything. I came because I was running. And then your daughter," his voice faltered. "She called me daddy and I didn't know how to breathe." Claire's anger softened but did not vanish. "She thinks you'll stay." "I want to," he said hoarsely. "Don't say that unless you mean it. She's already lost enough." Graham's eyes burned. His hands shook as he finally spoke the truth he had carried like a stone in his chest. "I lost my daughter too, Lily. She was 6. She believed pianos could talk if you played them gently enough, and I wasn't there the night she needed me most. I was sitting in a glass conference room arguing about profits while my wife drove her home through a snowstorm. They never made it back." The confession hung heavy in the sanctuary. Claire's arms slowly dropped to her sides. The fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something more fragile: understanding. She sat beside him on the pew. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Ellie gave you a family in her mind before you even earned it." "I don't know how to earn it," Graham admitted. "You don't," Claire said softly. "You just choose it and stay." The days that followed carried both tension and tenderness. Graham kept showing up. He tuned the piano until its notes rang clear. He hung garlands where they sagged. He helped the children practice their lines. Ellie, as always, shadowed him, slipping her hand into his as though it belonged there. One afternoon, Pastor Alice, retired choir director and sharp observer, watched him quietly before saying to Claire, "Some people talk their way into our lives. Others just change the light bulbs. Don't mistake silence for emptiness. Sometimes it's the loudest truth." Claire wanted to believe her, and part of her already did, but trust, once broken, takes time. Ellie, however, had no doubts. She drew picture after picture of the three of them together. One showed Graham with a red scarf standing between her and Claire beneath a Christmas tree. She handed it to him proudly. "This is us, my family." His chest tightened as he took it. He had not dared imagine such a thing in years. As the concert drew closer, so did the storm brewing between truth and hope. The night of the performance, the sanctuary overflowed with townspeople, candles flickering in every window. Pine garlands twined around the beams, and the children buzzed with nervous energy. Ellie stood center stage in her red velvet dress, her small hands trembling. She scanned the crowd until her eyes found Graham. He nodded once, steadying her. Then she began to sing. Her voice wavered at first but soon grew strong, carrying through the church with a purity that pierced every heart. Parents wiped tears. Claire watched with pride, her hands clasped tightly at her chest, and Graham closed his eyes, letting the notes wash over him like balm on old wounds. For the first time, memories of Lee and Lily did not crush him. They simply lived alongside the present, softer now, gentler. When the final note faded, the applause thundered. Ellie beamed, but Graham didn't return to his seat. Instead, he stepped onto the stage, a small box in his hand. He knelt not in the center but beside Ellie. The crowd hushed. "I lost everything once," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I thought grief would be the end of me, but this little girl opened a door I thought was gone. And you," he turned to Claire, "reminded me what family feels like, what love sounds like. So tonight, in front of everyone who matters to you and to me, I want to ask, can we be family? Not just for now, not just through Christmas, but always." Ellie squealed, bouncing. "Say yes, Mommy, say yes." Claire's tears spilled freely. She nodded, whispering through sobs, "Yes." The sanctuary erupted in cheers. Candles flickered, bells rang, and for a moment it felt as though the very walls were singing. Graham wrapped his arms around Claire and Ellie, holding them close as snow fell softly outside. That night, beneath the massive Christmas tree in the town square, the three of them stood hand in hand, watching children make snow angels. "It looks like magic," Ellie whispered. Claire smiled. "It is, sweetheart." And Graham, for the first time in years, believed her. "This time," he said, voice trembling but sure, "I'm not going anywhere." And he didn't. Sometimes the most powerful stories do not begin with certainty, but with a whisper, a fragile request spoken by a child who refuses to stop believing. "Please be my daddy." Those words did not just reach Graham's ears. They cracked open a heart that had been sealed by years of grief. And in that single moment, a lonely man who had lost everything was given a chance to step into something new. Not a replacement for what was gone, but a rebirth of what family can mean. Ellie saw him not as a stranger but as a promise. Claire, cautious yet hopeful, slowly allowed herself to trust again. And Graham, who once thought he was too broken to love, discovered that love often arrives not when we are ready but when we are willing to stay. It was not grand gestures that changed him. It was crayons, laughter, off-key songs, and small hands reaching for his. The truth of this story is simple, yet it carries the weight of every heart that has ever longed for a second chance. Family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about courage. It is about showing up when you could walk away, choosing presence over absence, love over fear. Graham's journey reminds us that healing does not erase the past, it transforms it, weaving sorrow and joy into something new, something whole. And perhaps that is the quiet miracle of Christmas. Not that the world becomes perfect, but that hope sneaks in through the cracks we thought would never close. Snow covering the scars of the street, music softening the silence of regret, a child's belief daring us to believe again. Graham did not find his way back to life by accident. He found it because someone small and brave called him by a name he thought he could never carry again. And in answering that call, he discovered that even in the deepest winter, love can write a new song. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that no matter how much we lose, love still finds a way back, then we invite you to stay with us. There are more stories waiting, stories of healing, of courage, of unexpected family, stories that echo long after the final word. Subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories, and let these tales remind you that tomorrow is still a gift. Because sometimes, the very thing we fear we have lost forever is waiting for us in the most unexpected places. And when we choose to stay, to listen, and to love, that is when the true story begins.